good afternoon, everybody, and good morning if you're joining from the APAC region. Thanks for joining us today. We are excited here to start talking about data-driven organizations and transformation. This webinar is actually described as a panel webinar, but I feel like this will be much more of a discussion rather than a panel. We've got a few questions and a few topics to cover, but this will be very much a conversation with some backed by some fantastic and inspiring leaders and a team with really, really great experience in this space. So we might kick off then. I'm not sure if everybody received an invite with a quote in the tagline, but we were referencing a quote from Ray Wang as we were thinking about what are the most important things to talk about when we talk about data-driven organizations. And the quote really talked about data being the foundation of every digital business, and really the future requiring a focus on rapid enablement of precision decisions. And those are things that our colleagues and our partners and our teams are all focused on strong data foundations, really enabling transformation rapidly, making sure that we're driving transformation as fast as possible and as safe as possible in very highly regulated environments. And lastly, that focus on precision. Are we making the right decision for our clients and the right decision for our teams, leveraging the data and the information that we have? So we're going to dive into these topics today, which is pretty exciting. We're going to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities there and really learn from Julia Carrion and Beth Pollack and myself, Kelly Atchell, and the team here. Julia and Beth are really, really incredibly knowledgeable and experienced and inspiring leaders in this space. So I'm super excited to have you. Thank you for joining us. Very much appreciate it. So maybe we'll just jump into some introductions. So Julia, you've been a driving force in data and financial services with the likes of Citi and Wells for more than 20 years. Now you're a founder of a startup, amongst many other things. Can you tell us something about you and your career and your data experience that our audience might not know?
Sure. Hi, thanks for having me. I actually have to say this, it's no surprise, but I love that this is an all-female panel, particularly not to be political, but in light of what's going on in the United States with Kamala Harris and then her leveraging potentially Taylor Swift. I just feel like it's a great moment to have really knowledgeable leaders that are female being highlighted. So thanks for having me, Kelly. Listen, a couple things. I was on the small team that built Wells Fargo's private bank 18 years ago, and across all channels, which I think we did a really nice job of making sure we were positioning ourselves to take advantage of data in the right way. I also led the largest investment management conversion in US banking history and did not miss a single file. And let me tell you, we didn't miss a single file. Why? Because we had our data in order. So that is super important. And then finally, I think I talk a lot about failure and how failure is a defining moment for all leaders. I also was brought in to fix a multi-million-dollar failed transformation that went completely sideways because of data. So it was data that had been sitting dormant for 30 years. We didn't take the time to understand the complexities of the calculations that were driving that data. And we did not have our act together. And it was a massive failure that required quite a bit of remediation. So I can talk data all day long, and we can talk about when it goes well and when it doesn't go well. But many organizations are grappling with this right now as you're particularly doing transformations. And so I'm excited to talk to you and Beth about that today.
It sounds like there's a whole other discussion on failure and transformation in light of that, because that's almost a completely other topic, which is exciting. And I definitely echo the sentiments about having an all female panel and having strong leadership from women. That's really, really important to me, and I think important to all of us. Beth, when we first had a discussion and sort of were getting to know each other, I looked at your LinkedIn profile and I noticed that you describe yourself as an applied AI and data strategy operating partner. And when I talk about strategy at Lab, I really use the term applied strategy, taking a really abstract and challenging goal, and really defining the practical approach to achieving that. So I love the way that you describe yourself. Can you tell us more about your background and experience that you've built up over your 20-year career around data and financial services?
We're our veteran. We've been through a lot of transformation. We've been through the number one thing with data is resiliency. And when you think about success or failure with transformation and data and everything that's happening with AI, it's the reason why you have to well define what you're playing for, because there will always be bumps in the road. And the difference between success or failure is riding through that and just solutioning through that with a team of people. But yeah, so applied, I called myself applied AI and data strategy because it really is about going everything from design to having true and meaningful impact with companies, and going from design all the way through production, and then kind of iteration and the tracking of the progress there, and the kind of like improvement over time of whatever you're building. And just some background on myself. Yes, have always been a data person. It's a bit more in favor now than it was 25 years ago, but it's a way of thinking about using data to inform decisions. And so have been building what I define to be decision systems, which is integrating data into a workflow to support how we're making decisions. MIT for graduate school, then I was at Goldman Sachs. I have a background of both as an investor and what I call decision system developer. Initially that manifested itself with building trading systems for multi-billion-dollar portfolios across both the sell side and the buy side. And now I'm fully transitioned to the operating partner role, which is helping the portfolio companies of private equity firms optimize, data-driven growth and efficiency with data.
Goodness, it's such an expansive set of experiences that you have. It's really, really interesting. I like the way you talk about from design to impact. And when you kind of describe your roles, it almost talks about that whole landscape, or that whole spectrum of activities, from starting out thinking about what you need to do all the way through to realizing that and realizing the outcomes of that. So great to have you, and I'm really excited to dive in now into this topic. So I guess firstly, why is this conversation important? There's so many challenges for financial firms today. Why do you think we're still talking about data?
Well, from my perspective, it's extremely still very much early stages, with companies truly appreciating the data asset that they have. And so, when I think about data and I think about companies, the ability to unlock the value of their data, I support in a few different ways. One is revenue generation through data integrated products. So what data do you have that supports a new revenue stream or opportunity, or like makes the product more sticky or more valuable or more customized? And then, efficiency through digital agents, like this could be AI, this could be ML, this, supporting kind of the development of a workflow process, to make it stronger, not only faster, but better, with a better outcome. And then, the last one is really just, supporting what could be better experiences, or it could be data monetization, which is what data do you have that might be valuable outside of your organization, that a third party could find very valuable as they're making their decisions.
Right. It's interesting that you talk about that third-party data, like finding that data. That's one of the challenges, right? To be able to figure out what are the data assets that I want to curate and bring into an organization? What are the things that I already have that I don't want to then, pay for? I do have one example where one of the organizations we've worked with is really pushes their data out to an external body to do all of the management of that data and then brings that data back into the organization. So really interesting how people think about third party and external data as well.
Yeah, and
Julia,
with that, the decision really goes around, like what is the prioritization of the data that you have?
yeah.
Do you have the internal capabilities to be able to do that, or is that a distraction from what your primary focus is as well?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, there's an element of maturity there, definitely. Well, what are your thoughts, Julia, when it comes to, why is this such a big focus for financial services firms today?
Well, look, I'm going to take a typically controversial Julia type view and say the dirty little secret out loud, which is we're still having this conversation because so many organizations did not think through how are we going to use our data in a way that actually recognizes an end-to-end life cycle, right? And so the reality is that many of the top tier firms have their data trapped in silos. They don't necessarily have it connected end to end in a customer type view, right? And I'll give an example. You've got your KYC data that you've used to check a box for your compliance reasons. Then you've got your CRM data that is sitting there potentially, that your advisors are having access to. And some firms have done a good job of making sure that the data that they need to kind of really run fast with AI is all in one place and leverageable. But actually, a lot of firms have not done that, right? So we are still far away from being able to serve up a personalized experience at scale based on the current landscape of the data that we have. And at least that's what I've seen in the US. I have more experience now internationally. I think APAC maybe is a little bit more evolved in their thinking. But if you're a smaller firm, what I would be encouraging you to do is make sure you think through that end to end before you get started, right? And you don't have to be thinking that you're behind the big firms. I would encourage you to say you actually have a chance, I think, to run faster than the big firms, because the big firms are really grappling with the state of their data and the implications of it in their enterprise. And I would say that it is a wide problem in the industry. So I do think we're still talking about it. I think we're going to be talking about it for a while still.
I think it's really interesting. It connects to that design to impact sort of phrase that you used, Beth, as well, recognizing how you use data in that end-to-end life cycle and bringing that together. And it's so interesting that you talk about smaller firms having an opportunity, because sometimes it feels a lot like we talk about big data, we talk about big organizations, and then that, that momentum where that's going to really differentiate and just make leaders, even so much more ahead of those smaller players. But it sounds like smaller, more agile shops, if they've got their data landscape under control, are going to be able to compete in different ways, because there's a lot of complexity in those bigger organizations. There's a lot of fragmentation. There's a lot of silos, like you talked about, Julia.
Yeah.
I think just the other thing to add is this whole element around trust and security. Every other day, there's some sort of data breach. All of a sudden, data is very, very personal, where it used to be, locked inside organizations. It's now, all of your clients and all of the consumers of data are actually worried about that data as well. So there's almost an element. It feels a lot like we're having to continuously build trust, or firms are having to continually build trust around the way they're working with our data, clients' data, consumers' data. So that's, I think, another reason that this is a major topic, particularly in financial services.
You know what, Kelly, I would just add something that I thought of that I think is really important, which is the step that I see missing in so many firms, even today, that just surprises me, because I've been ringing the bell on this. Beth, I'm curious, how your comment on this.
Also, I wonder if we're about to say the same thing. So go ahead.
Well, it's so funny. So I'm thinking about firms need to be thinking about continuously keeping that data hygienic, and routines for doing that should be part of your normal BAU. And whether that's leveraging your advisors to do that, having protocols for that, and or doing kind of more, centralized, organized data cleanups. But like one thing that is true, right, is that 10 years goes by fast and 5 years goes by fast. Like it's amazing to me how fast time flies. Like you should be doing your data hygiene on a regular basis, like every 3 years, no more than that. And that just feels like one of those routine business functions that, at least in the organizations that I'm familiar with, they just don't have that muscle. So
Yeah.
what were you going to say, Beth? Was it slightly
No, I was
different?
going to
'Cause
say,
we wanna hear.
I agree with that. And, if you think about the why, it's this transition of banks to being technology organizations. And some of them are better than that than others. And so like, if I think about the why of why we have dirty data, part of it is, or a solution is like this modern data product manager. Kind of what are we building? Why are we building it? How does the customer value it? How can we scope it in a way that it's achievable? What are the primary metrics for success that we need to capture? And what is the organization that we need in order to achieve it? Because that's what makes everything more, that way, it's not this like general, we have all the data and all the data needs to be cleaned. It is, we need this data for this end purpose, and here's how we're going to present it. And here's what the ROI will have of doing, here's the return if we do that, and therefore that justifies the investment. And then you can have a proper modern data engineering organization that depends on machine learning, and you have a focus of the why, of like why they're preparing their data. And of course, you won't know all of the use cases, but those skill sets, at least, when I was, internal to banks and definitely on the buy side, that persona hasn't really existed in the way that it's starting to exist now. And that is the muscle that organizations will need to build, if they're going to be, if they're really just going to be becoming technology companies, that support financial decisions.
So interesting. I feel like we can kind of dive into all of these topics, right? So routine, continuous hygiene. I really, really like that. Organizations do have to think about how they do that. I feel like pushing things off into a central function, you have to be really responsible for the data and the quality of that data and the cleanliness of that data so it can be used. And building that in as a continuous process, I absolutely agree, Julia, it's really, really critical. And that switch, Beth, over to being intentional about where you focus. You don't have to clean everything. There's so much there. Focus, be intentional about that focus, pick those use cases, link to things that can drive value, focus on cleaning those things and doing that work. Some really, really interesting insights. I guess when we think about data-driven organizations, what are the things we're looking for? What are the characteristics that are demonstrative of a data-driven organization? How does it look different to an organization that's not harnessing its data maybe as effectively? Julia, do you have any sort of thoughts on what a good data-driven organization looks like?
Yeah, look, I think the number one thing that I would say is, I kind of touched on it initially, but I think it really bears repeating. You have to force people out of silos. So the best data-driven organizations have a comprehensive view of who their clients are, what's the absolute nth degree of what that client might be doing, and how are they potentially crossing across your organization, and do you know that? And to Beth's point, have you organized your kind of product development, your execution roadmap in a way that enables that view? I feel like so many organizations get trapped in, okay, this is my job, this is what I get to control. And when they do that, you lose something. And I think it's really important to give examples. One example is that if you have an asset management business and a wealth management business and an investment bank, right? a client could be doing business with all three of those organizations, and those clients expect you to know them no matter where they are. And the reality is that a lot of organizations aren't able to capture that value. They don't realize that the startup founder who is going through a liquidity event and might be taking that wealth and making it a personal private banking account has to start over when they come to the other side of your wealth management organization. And they have to then they have to repaper, and they have to re-KYC, and they have to do everything from scratch. And I really think that a more sophisticated answer is, let's really understand who our client is and how they're going to be interacting with us in total. You don't have to solve, to Beth's point, all the use cases at once, but you have to be mindful of, like, you start with your client, what is their need and what is their need holistically, and go from there. And I know that kind of sounds like bread and butter and table stakes and all of that, and motherhood and apple pie, but the reality is that most firms are not there.
Yeah, and after that, like like in support of that, well, one is obviously there's a regulatory component where we can't see all things about all information.
Yeah.
But this top layer of shared metrics and data, whether it's about the customer or whether it's about profitability, just the shared accountability and numbers that everyone is looking at, that's a key stakeholder that really groups everyone together and then creates transparency and accountability, I think is critical. And then there will always also be silos. And so having that like deep, dedicated, data-driven decision or data view of how your business is and how your business is running, the top of which just flows up for the transparency to the broader organization. I think it helps with the discipline, and it helps with kind of responsibility, and it helps with accountability. And so, those two aspects of things, like the broad shared one data asset with the kind of like siloed specific view that allows you to be regulatory compliant, I think is what I've seen to be most successful.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? There's this acknowledgement of the fragmentation or the diversity of larger firms, and maybe the disconnects that make it hard to be a data-driven organization, but then a need to also focus on that, because that can be a differentiator, right? So there's specialists in those areas, but we need to have that shared. I think you described it as a shared data asset just now. So that,
yeah, and I'll add to that is really the CEO's responsibility. Like if we could answer this question in a different way, which is sponsorship and leadership are the largest distinguishing factor between success and failure with data. And so that CEOs increasingly are being pressed to be data people and have an expectation of their direct reports.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's a good call out, that sponsorship and that leadership. When it's not there, you can tell, right? You can, in those transformation projects that you were talking about, Julia, as well, like those, some of those failures come from not because people aren't working really, really hard to transform. It's that leadership, that vision, and that sponsorship to see these types of transformations all the way through to impact. I keep using that. I keep thinking about that phrase, but
Good, I'm glad. It's what drives me all the time. It's the initiatives, the projects I worked on. I'm like, hey, can I have transformational impact? Otherwise, like, like I really want to help change the company. This is how I try to really touch things. And I think it also, one point I'll make here is just the importance of upskilling. And this is what I do in an advisory capacity. Not all CEOs have this muscle. So just helping them, leading, showing them what good looks like. And, and that expectation that all of us are in a stage of upskilling right now as technology advances the way that it is. And I also will put that as a responsibility of our boards. Like making sure that we have people on boards that have a data and AI expertise, that are, creating this governance and support as these transformations happen, that can identify potential risks and make recommendations as kind of like the harder parts of the puzzles are being pushed through.
You know,
Yeah.
Kelly, just what I would add that I just think, like, think about the statistic that 70% of major transformations in financial services fail. Across all sectors. Actually, I
Across
think it's
all
higher.
Yeah.
I think it's higher
And the
actually in
number is
financial
probably even
services.
higher than that,
Yeah, it's
honestly.
higher. Yeah. So that's billions of dollars, right? That is wasted. And I specialize in deep tech transformations. And I'll just tell you, it doesn't have to be that way. And I think Beth has hit on a really important key, which is that it's about leadership. And one of the biggest things that I would say to people that are listening right now is that leadership depends on you, not just assuming that everything is going to be fine. Like, it's about you, to Beth's point, knowing which questions to ask to figure out if the team is in trouble and how and where do they need help, and not assuming that everything is fine. And those devils are in the details. And I do think that the time has passed for senior leaders to just be talking heads that make big decisions in meetings. Like, you don't have to micromanage. It's not about that, but it is enough, knowing enough about your details, the CEO point that Beth made, that is absolutely essential to successful transformations.
So interesting. I don't want to go too far off topic, but on this one, I mean, I read an article a little while ago just about the transition from CEOs often coming through the business pathways, but also now coming through tech and through data. And we're starting to see more and more CEOs stepping into, CIOs, CDs, CDOs stepping into those executive visionary roles. Have you seen that? I'm just curious. I know we're off topic, so we can come back to the focus discussion
Still,
in a
to
second.
me, the number one focus of a CEO is customer facing and kind of like, and sales, right? And so if you have a unicorn person who is kind of like data oriented, understands technology, but is highly commercial, I mean, I like to think of myself in that way, so I know that it exists. But you really need somebody who is well-rounded, and really has a commercial lens in the way that they think about technology. So
Yeah,
I like
really,
the
really.
concept. I haven't seen it much yet, but
Yeah. Well, it all comes down to a balance, isn't it? It's a balance of leadership. These days, you need that tech leadership, data leadership, business leadership to come together and really operate in sync to be able to leverage all of the assets, and not just the business assets, not the investment assets, but also those data and technical assets as well.
yeah,
I mean,
so company specific, and like, and I would say, but I would agree with you that like there's a much bigger seat at the table now than there has ever been, as far as kind of like both growth, transformation, efficiency, distinguishing yourself in a market, scalability, in those like data and technology seats than there's ever been.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So we've been talking a little bit about maybe what rapid enablement practically requires. Like, how do we actually do things faster? How do we move from where we are today to that ideal state much more quickly? So we've dived into a little bit of that, but there's one phrase that you used, Julia, a few times as we were connecting on this topic. You said projects fail when you try to eat the elephant whole. And I feel like I've stolen your quote there, because it's such a great quote. But can you talk a little bit more about that, or some experience you've had where, the thing has just been too big, the task has been too big, the transformation has been too big?
Yeah, you're welcome to steal that, Kelly. I'm sure I stole it from someone else, but I do love it, and I think it's super relevant. So look, I saw a $1 billion project fail, right? And it was literally a $1 billion write-off. And so you learn a lot when you're failing. And the reality is that what happened is you had a project management and product management organization like go away with tech and try to solve a massive problem without, and like go away and work on it for years and years and then unveil it like ta-da. And that just doesn't work in practical terms, right? First of all, you've got to be delivering client facing wins. There's an expectation to be delivering client and advisor facing wins at a more agile pace, obviously, these days. So you've got that pressure. And then those gigantic transformations become crushing because you're too disconnected from the day-to-day of the business to really be in sync with getting it done in a way that actually lands well, right? So the most important thing that I say about rapid enablement is, in order to run fast, you have to start slow. And I see so many projects fail because they did not really plan for kind of what is all of the worst case scenarios and where do we have hornets that we could be mowing over and then getting stung by. And I think, and I'll, just give you one example where, you've got data that is being run with calculations on top of it, and you forget to actually do the forensic accounting on the calculations and then really understand what the data is telling you as you move to a new system. Any one of those things, if they are not completely well understood and you are not deliberate about what is the impact on operations, what is the impact on the front office, and then ultimately what is the client and advisor impact, then you can go really pear-shaped. And so I would say 100% do not ever skimp on planning when it comes to a large data transformation. I'm sure Beth has even more experience with me than that, but yeah, I really got a plan for every single scenario.
I think it's interesting. I wrote some notes down there. So you don't want to shortcut that planning activity because you're so eager, but data is an area where everyone is really eager to get involved and eager to make change and see transformation quickly, or see the value of their efforts quickly. But yeah, that key reminder that let's go back and let's do our due diligence and do the right planning is really, really important to avoid those failures, because some of these failures, like you said, can be catastrophic. We talked about you mentioned $100 million write-off. That's massive for organizations. The other thing I think that's interesting in this space is that's making change hard is there's not necessarily consistent industry-wide patterns that solve for all of the different environments that firms are working in. So a wealth firm's data estate might look quite different to a retail bank or a commercial bank or an investment bank or an exchange platform. So all of these different players in financial services are dealing with data that yes, it can all be categorized as data, but it's characteristically quite different. And so then technically our solutions to that may need to be quite different as well. So it's not necessarily one solution that fits all of these problem spaces. So that focus on planning, that focus on being intentional about what you're going to change is really, really important. So we can start to pick the right patterns, the right design patterns, the right implementation patterns to help enable that change.
Yeah,
well, sorry, I was just gonna, Beth, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to the funny thing is too, and then making sure that you have rigorous testing, right? And I don't know if anybody saw on X or Twitter last week with the CrowdStrike debacle. It was a funny meme about didn't anybody have to do regression testing on this before it went live? I just thought that was funny. So anyway, Beth, sorry.
Oh yeah, funny, but it's very not funny what's happened.
Very not funny, yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm just gonna add, I agree on the planning, and then what I would add to that is what planning allows you to do is have more transparency and set expectations. And so a lot of what I do with boards is say, hey, here's the time horizon. I know you want it more quickly. Here's the steps we're going through. Here's what we think is realistic to achieve, and here's why. and here's why we can't go faster, or here's how much money it might take for us to go fast, but only after this first stage. And so it allows you the credibility for that transparency to manage expectations. And like, I think that's as important as anything else, because if not, what happens is you get pressed to take shortcuts. And then those shortcuts end up being your demise. When I think about failures that I've seen, it's because you're trying, like you were saying, now even if you've planned, but then people get impatient and then you take a shortcut that you can't come back from.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
shortcut pathways. Again, it's that eagerness, right? Let's deliver value faster.
But speed to value, you need to kind of like, in some ways, you need to provide an appetizer, right? Like you have to understand the audience as well. And so figuring out how you can kind of like break things into pieces. And you and I have talked about this, Kelly, like I don't do proof of concepts for the sake of proof of concepts. I will build something that's a foundational brick for a longer term vision, but also shows some success and build some credibility and accountability. That's what I recommend for people, as they start. So you have less throwaway work and you're one step further towards kind of like achieving the broader production goal.
Yeah,
and that's exactly what I do. And that is so fascinating to me that I'm just going to bring it back to the women part. I feel like that is women tend to be very practical. Like you can't, once you lose credibility with the bad conversion, you just, it can, to your point, Kelly, it's catastrophic and you can't recover. Right. So being practical about it and planful, I love you describing it, Beth, as a brick. That is really same thing here.
Yeah, it's a really nice term, that core, like, rather than thinking of this as a proof of something that we could do, this is the foundation of what we're going to do. And it's quite a different.
I mean, the horse has left the stable, like in some ways, like we're no longer proving that data or AI has value. I think now everyone's kind of got the joke. They've started to see some companies be successful in it. Although, as we talked about earlier, we're still extremely early stages.
Definitely. So that's probably a good dive into some good real world examples. So have you seen some interesting use cases that are really driving value for organizations? The ones that are really compelling organizations to keep investing in their data landscape and in data-driven decision making.
So
Julia, did you want to?
Yeah, no, sure. I'm happy to. Look, I think that the organizations that have been thoughtful about that end-to-end journey and what does it look like and how are we importantly putting it together with whoever their relationship manager is or whoever is selling, right? And making all of that contextual and doing it end to end, and then leveraging, third-party tools. I happen to love Addepar. So, how do you then make the right choices with the right vendors to come up with an offering that is delightful, is really hard, and not very many people have cracked the code, but the ones that have cracked the code have absolutely thought about all of their stakeholders, and they understand where their data is value, like what part of their data has value to them and why, to Beth's point about ROI, and they're able to go for it, and you're able to leverage AI in a way that is meaningful and I think will move the needle. And here's what I think that is going to happen, right? We are in this stage where everybody's figuring it out. And I really believe that in terms of the big wealth management firms, someone is going to crack the code, and it's going to seem like it happened all at once when really it has been in the works for a really long time.
It's really interesting you say that, because I think we were discussing the duration of things, like how long are these, how much of an investment and for how long? And going back to your point earlier, Julia, this is continuous. It's continuous investment in data and leveraging that data. But we've seen firms on the journey for 10 years, for much, much longer, starting to see benefits and starting to be able to talk about those. You also talked about it in one of our conversations around firms that are leveraging, bringing together all of their digital touch points, and making sure that there was that connected journey. Have you seen that? Have you seen any firms that are really connecting those or working on connecting those touch points to bring together all of their, to bring together that customer journey using data?
I think someone will. I won't say the name of the firm that I think is doing it very well, but to be specific about what those assets are, is your internal, right? Your internal client portal, matching it with your CRM, and then having that connected to your operations unit is absolutely critical, right? It's like making sure that everybody is able to play in a way that will allow you to run fast. But I'll just say, right, like, I remember a client whose family made their wealth through the grandfather was the best friend of Walt Disney, and so he was their lawyer, and they were very deeply held in Disney. And 18 years ago, the matriarch of the family, who was in her 70s at that point, said to me, I don't understand how come when I log into your website that you haven't kind of figured out that you should be serving up an entire personalized experience around Walt Disney, which includes like feeding in news about, like, I don't know, DeSantis picking on the CEO, like all of that. That vision that she put forward 18 years ago is still not real. And I think that that's kind of one of the holy grails that people need to chase, which is, how do we really get to that goal of hyper personalization at scale using AI? It's just, I think someone's going to get there, and I wish them well, and I wish that I was their head of digital transformation when they get there.
Yeah, and I guess the follow on to that is like, and how does that help you sell more stuff?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, how are you building something that feels like a personalized experience that also allows you to increase your AUM, or helps them feel more in touch with their wealth, or shows them things that they may not know is capable of cross-selling to other parts of the organization, or gives them exposure to an expert, or that's all that additional feature functionality, like, is also intentional, not just experience, but with like the lens of, data-driven growth.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we can see all of the benefits. It's now about, seeing them realized. So I guess I recognize we're running up on time, and we haven't covered some of the topics we wanted to cover, but maybe it makes sense to kind of jump to the question that we want to focus on, which is, how do we bring business leaders closer to data? How do we connect, as we talked about, that having that leadership and that sponsorship, having the deep expertise from a business perspective, what we're selling, how we're selling it, how we engage with our customers, all comes from the business parts of the organization. Then it's about connecting data to that, and connecting our technology assets as well. How do we bring business leaders closer to data? How do we get them more engaged and really advocating and sponsoring in the way that we need them to?
I can take this.
Yeah.
I want to, I would say, I think in some ways I'm lucky that I grew up as an investor, because I'm very comfortable with putting numbers down on paper. But like, like for me, quantifying the opportunity and explaining to business leaders and stakeholders, like, quote unquote, like what's in it for them. And then having the accountability of also having those numbers down on paper as well, I think is the key to kind of bringing, or how I found success in change management and bringing different stakeholders together. Here's what we're playing for, and therefore here are the steps that we need.
Yeah, I like that. Really important. What are your thoughts, Julia, when it comes to bringing business leaders closer to data?
I think it's a mindset of this is not somebody else's problem anymore. I think Beth really hit on it very well at the very beginning, which was um, the idea that like data and tech sat somewhere else and that was just this distant thing. I think, you know, CEOs should be holding their direct reports accountable for understanding, at least at a macro level, what data is driving their business and what is driving their revenue. How are they increasing wallet share? And then really holding them accountable for that knowledge. And I think, you know, if I were um, a head, like marketing's not a good example because marketing heads have to be really good at data. But, you know, if I was a COO, right, I would be taking a class on AI. There's tons of them that are free. I would be taking a class on data management. I would be conversant because I do think that it is increasingly an expectation to understand technology in a way that was not typical 20 years ago.
Agreed.
Yeah, yeah, some really fundamental things there. So that mindset and being responsible for data end to end, and everybody's being responsible for data, really, really important. And then that link back to value, really being sure we're linking it back to, I think you used the phrase, this is what we're playing for. Yeah, really, really important. Well, I think we're up on time, and we didn't cover some of the topics that we wanted to dive into, but broadly this conversation has been fantastic. So I really appreciate being able to talk to you both, being able to share this with a broader community of business and data leaders. And I'm very, very grateful for both of you for dedicating the time to this. Definitely appreciate it. We'll get a recording out, get some notes out, I'm sure. And I'm hoping I can open the opportunity for the community to reach out to all of us to continue the conversation.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll get on with my morning.
Sure.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.